Very happy to host this webinar tonight. I hope the sound is good, the image is good as well. Don't hesitate to say it in the chat, in comments. We can obviously read everything. So today, the goal of this webinar is to talk about obviously pricing, but not only. I'm joined today by David and Merci that I will introduce in 5 seconds. Just before, for everyone who doesn't know us, my name is Luca. I'm the CEO and founder of Hyperline. Hyperline is a billing company. And the reason why we do this webinar series on pricing is because one of the reasons we've started the Hyperline is to make iterations on pricing and pricing changes and configurations really easy. And the fact that it's really easy means that you can change your pricing strategy quite often, which you probably couldn't do before. And so today we're going to have a chat about that, especially about the early stages pricing strategy from Notion that David was the head of sales of. So David, you've been at Typeform, you've been at Notion. Now you are the chief business officer at Scoreplay after a little break, if I remember well. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Cool. And Merci is joining us. Merci has founded a company that's called Panobi. That's a company that's for growth and marketing people. And she's probably going to tell us more about that later in the stream. And before that, she was the head of growth at Slack in the early days, which I think turned out very well.
Yeah,
that's fair to say.
Cool. So now that we have you, we're together for like 40 minutes. If you have questions from the chat, don't hesitate to ask them as well. I will try to read and to answer the questions, and we will try to answer the question. The first thing that I would like to start with is that pricing is a very important topic at the beginning. We see it at Hyperline. Like we have a lot of conversations. Every time we talk to new customers, we have a lot of conversations around how much should we say to them? Is it okay that we have different people paying different things? Should we go usage? Should we go with a flat fee? Like, how do we manage that? So my first question for you is at both Slack and Notion, and maybe David, you can start. What was the initial thinking, especially in the early days and after when you started doing the first big sales as well? What was the initial thinking on pricing? Was it something that was important at the time, or was the product sort of viral enough that you didn't really think about it? It was just selling for selling, and then you saw about it later? Like, how were the early days?
Yeah. Well, I guess in productivity, and I'm curious to hear what Merci says as well about Slack, but in productivity, it's pretty obvious that you need to go seat-based pricing. So the considerations were a little bit more, how do we gain traction in terms of adoption and market share? Frankly, over how do we optimize monetization? And obviously over time that changes where you're trying to figure out monetization. But in the early days, it was, we need a seat-based pricing, but we also want to make sure that we have a generous enough free plan that we're getting a lot of usage, both for adoption and to make sure that we're learning from those free users to continue to improve our product market fit.
How was it at Slack?
Yeah, I think the thing that Slack did that was unique is set that initial price point to be almost 3 times what similar tools were charging. So there's like obviously
3 times.
Free. Oh yeah, so there's like free IRC, right? And then I think Yammer may have been like $1 a seat, and I think HipChat was maybe $2 a seat, and then Slack came in being like almost $8 a seat. I think was the initial pricing. There was already about $6 million in revenue when I joined for a 50% company with no growth team and 500,000 daily active users. So it was very clear product market fit. And I agree with David that for a collaboration tool, seat-based pricing makes a lot of sense. It also makes sense because that's something that your customer can control. One of the things that they can't control as well are things like usage and like event streams and things like that. So that can really sort of spiral. It can spiral out too if there's like a bug, and that just doesn't happen for usage-based seating.
But it's counterintuitive in a way, right? The fact that because Notion, Slack, all of these collaboration tools, like you take Linear, you take any of these, they have to get viral internally, they need more people on the app. Yet you need to pay to add more people. How was it managed? For like David, how was it managed as Notion? Do you pay when you add the person? Do you add your card details, or is it like at the end of the month? How does it work?
Yeah, so this was not my idea, but I thought it was very clever. The idea is that the free plan, you can add as many seats as you want. The limit was on the block usage. So blocks are like the kind of smallest unit of content that you're creating in Notion, and you had a limit of 1,000 blocks. So if you're using it as an individual user, that'll last you a very long time. If you're using it as a team of 50, that'll go by faster, but you can add as many as you want. Then the question is also, when you're adding users, do you create friction there and have you have to stop and agree that you're going to pay more? Or do you just let people add users and bill them at the end of the month or the end of the quarter? And that's something we played around with. And users, the least friction you have, the more people come back at the end of the month and they'll say, hey, I didn't want to add these people, or I want a refund or something like that. And the more you create the friction when people are trying to add users, the less expansion you get.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I had the discussion the other day with someone who's creating a tool. It's like Notion, but for engineering teams. So it's specifically integrated within engineering tools and everything. And he had the same question. It was like, I want to be purely usage based, because I don't want the teams to not invite some people and then get the tool to deploy less within the organization. But then he realized after doing this that like people don't want to pay on usage based on nodes, integrations, or anything. They just want to be like, I'm going to invite people and I want to know how much I'm going to pay, and I'm okay to commit, but I'm not okay to discover at the end of the month how much I'm going to pay. Like, is it the same at Slack? Or if your current company is seat-based? I don't think. Maybe Merci, your current company is seat-based?
Yeah, our current company is seat-based in part because that's a lot of what we learned. And that's also where our cost center comes from. So we integrate with BI tools and we pull in once a day your DAO wow or your landing page conversion so that you can see it next to your release data and the context about what your growth, marketing, and product teams are learning. It's really like a tool for helping you understand what's happening at the company. And so because of that, we knew that what we really were going to be scaling up our cost based on was the number of users on the team, because we're not owning the event stream the way that like a Mode or an Optimizely does, where they really have to, I think, charge based on the event stream, because that's the cost center for them. Similarly to the way that it's been very cool to see a lot of companies, and we'll probably do this when we have sort of a sufficiently robust AI feature, is separating out an AI product to be charged differently. So, Copilot, it's on top of the GitHub cost, for instance. And I think that, that makes a lot of sense, because people do, the main thing that your customers want is to understand, how much are you going to charge me and when? And so the easier it is to understand that, the better. Slack had this notion of fair billing, which was actually kind of a spaghetti code base to continue to implement, but also just something that customers didn't have an innate understanding of. The idea that people have to be like, oh, wait, so Sam was active for 4 days this month, and then we got prorated. And, people who are like CFOs would start writing into us saying, I have gotten these very strange emails from you saying that you've given me back $2.13. And it was surely not worth our time and energy to send that email.
It's the same thing with Amazon, they just refund people. They don't ask questions, deliver the same. Like the process is just too hard, right? David, you're going to say something.
Yeah, I was going to say at Notion, we tried something like that too, for two reasons. A lot of people would say, well, we have a certain amount of creators of content that are creating the content that lives in Notion, and we have the rest of the company that are more consumers of the content. They're less valuable. We want to pay less for those users, right? Yeah. And so, when I was doing enterprise deals, I would try to segment that, but that became, as Merci said, like incredibly messy, incredibly quickly, and we ended up dropping that and saying, no, we'll just do an overall discount on all seats. But part of what drove us to do that was competitors were doing that. So Merci mentioned, Slack had competitors much lower pricing, amongst which was Atlassian, which was also one of our big competitors early, which was Confluence. They were a lot less expensive. And then Coda also created that segmented pricing where they said, people who are creating content are on a certain price and people who are consuming content on another price. So that anchored a certain pricing conversation with us. And
that's interesting that you mentioned the enterprise thing, because I'm wondering, how does it scale for enterprise? Because when you close, I know Slack has the Financial Times as a customer. I know Notion has a bunch of very big companies as well on their website. how does it scale for big enterprises? You're not going to tell them like it's €8 or $8 per user for your 5,000 users. Like no one, they're not going to
it's
change
25.
every time they switch the number of users. Like how does it work for them?
Yeah. I guess I'll answer first and I'll let Merci go next. So first of all, each enterprise customers want manual invoicing. They don't want automated billing typically, which means that everything's a little bit more custom, and that for better or for worse allows us to do more custom stuff from the sales side, which, as I was just saying, can lead us to problems if you choose something that's complicated and then you do that with too many customers, or you do too many different custom plans for each unique customer who has their own requirements, and you end up regretting it. So the main difference that we landed on for enterprise accounts is that we allowed them to add and remove as many seats as they wanted throughout a quarter. And then at the end of the quarter, we'd sit down with them, do the QBR, and say, hey, you added 100 seats this quarter. Shall we invoice you for those 100 seats, or do you want to remove a bunch before we invoice you? And the reason we liked that was it created kind of a partnership. We weren't trying to screw them over and just charge, like, there's the concept of a high watermark where you charge for the most amount of users that they had at any point during that quarter. That felt a little, unnecessary from my perspective. And so it allowed our users to avoid that friction that we talked about at the beginning of adding new seats and removing seats and having to pay for it. They could just add as many as they wanted. A new team could experiment with Notion, and then at the end of the quarter, they could decide if they wanted to pay for it or not.
And that was
you
the
really don't want to
CSMs.
oversell seats. Sorry.
Go on.
You really don't want to oversell seats, in part because you want to show like continual expansion and high net revenue retention, or NRR. And so it's very important to make sure that you're saying, okay, well, we're going to, land and expand. We'll land with design, right? And like, here's how many seats we think that you'll have for design, even if you're pretty sure that, once you're sort of into the company, especially for products with the kind of like maybe even historic levels of product market fit that both Notion and Slack have enjoyed. You have to have basically confidence in the product. You have to have thought through the growth loops to make sure that you've built it to grow and expand internally. But then you want that sort of like pressure from top down to say, hey, here's the more expensive price point. Enable your team to give discounts against that, but also make sure that they know, like, don't eat the whole pie for breakfast. Like, have a slice because you also want a slice at lunch and a slice at dinner.
Yeah, that's a good point. I didn't plan to go that way, but now that you're talking about it, like, what are the metrics that we want to look at when we have like in general for collaboration tools, not only for seat-based pricing, but I think most collaboration tools, like if someone right now on the audience is having, like, I don't know, is working at Linear, they're working at like anything that's some sort of seat-based collaboration thing. What are the main metrics in terms of like revenue generation? You mentioned expansion, retention. Like for usage, for instance, it's about trying to commit as much usage as you can, and you don't really have any impact on the number of events that customers are going to use, for instance, or the number of API calls. What is it about for the seat-based pricing? Like David, for instance, in your experience, what did you track with the sales team? Like what, or the account manager, what were they incentivized to do? Push for more seats because the companies don't decide the company grow, right?
Yeah, I think Merci said it really well. I loved her analogy of the pie. The point is, we want to disincentivize the sales team from trying to eat the whole pie for breakfast, to quote Merci, because if the sales team is only comped when they land a deal and not for any expansion, they have an incentive to delay closing that deal, to make the deal as big as possible before they close it, because that's what they get commissioned on. Instead, what you want is for them to close what they have in front of them, that typically is a shorter sales cycle, gets them in, you get a champion, and then it's easier to expand from there. So yeah, that's part of what we were trying to do. Does that answer the question?
Yeah. Merci, anything to add?
Yeah, I would say that from the product side, one of the big things that we did at Slack early on, so I started on the first days of work of 2015 and stayed and ran the growth team for 2.5 years. And during that time, a lot of what we were doing around pricing and packaging was, instead of experimenting with like price points was creating new packages. So we had our initial that we landed with, and then we launched out the Plus plan, and then we later developed the Enterprise plan. So you can always, like, you know, these things like net revenue retention, expansion, they're very important metrics. There also should be a good partnership between sort of like product marketing and sales to understand, hey, we can go, if we add XYZ feature that people have been asking for, it's really these larger companies, like really understanding the segment of your customers through qualitative and quantitative research would be very helpful. When we were developing the enterprise grid plan, we actually like more or less embedded both a user researcher and a product manager with one of our massive enterprise clients, who would be one of the first folks there, because you can raise the prices. And for enterprise clients, if you want to have like, hey, you can bake it into the contract to say, you know, Q1, you'll be at this price and this number of seats. Q2, you'll be here. Q3, you'll be there. You could do that, especially if you're early on and you're going to be adding more value each quarter to the product. That's a good option for very early stage people.
I'm going to take two questions. I have one from Pierre, who's wondering, I think it's for in reaction to what David mentioned. How do you design the compensation plan from the sales team to go with that?
So a shout out to my friend Kyle from Figma. We borrowed what worked for Figma at Notion. But basically what we did is for enterprise deals on the enterprise plan, AEs were comped on any expansion that happened within the first 12 months. And on mid-market deals, AEs were comped on any expansion that happened within the first 6 months. And then the CSMs would drive the expansion, but AEs would be pulled in. And then the AE, if the AE doesn't need to help to expand the account, then it's more like time efficient for them to not help. But if it does help for them to be involved again, then they'll inherently get involved because they get comped on it. So it's kind of like any expansion that happens there is a win-win for sales and CS. And it also feels like the expansion that happens right after they land, so within 6 months for mid-market or a year for enterprise, feels like something that's kind of from the momentum of the sales cycle, which feels justified.
Cool. Pierre, I hope that answers the question. Merci, there was one question from Jeremy, which was, how do you help the head of growth pitch to the finance team the return on investment of your solution? Always a challenge when Excel is the competition. I think that's not your solution, maybe, but like your solution in general.
No, exactly. Yeah. So we pull in data directly from data warehouses and other BI tools. And that has really been the main driver of both like our price and our value prop to folks, is access to really important data for everyone in the organization. In part, we can do this because we're not using a usage-based model, we're using a seat-based model. And bouncing off of David's mention of Figma, we are likewise copying Figma because we heard actually during our pretty substantial willingness to pay process that was exactly the model that folks wanted, is like the maker versus viewer, designer versus, engineer sort of use case. And so we're able to really lean into data accessibility and visibility to help drive that conversation with heads of finance. You need to find the thing about your product that people are like, this is uniquely valuable, and lean into that, because it pretty much is a couple of features that are really driving that price.
Can you really, by the way, I'm thinking about it because the return on investment, like, can you really pitch something? Like, I know a lot of finance salespeople are going to tell you, you need to explain the return on investment. You need numbers. You need actual money to talk to the finance teams. Like, but for collaboration tools, you're not like, I don't think there is a way to, like, of course, with API calls, OpenAI, you can be like, okay, you're going to make more money than if you hire people to do that. But like with collaboration tools, it's not really the case. Do you really pitch the actual finance numbers, or is it?
No.
It's like time gain.
Not so far. I mean, I don't know if we won't like get to having to do that, especially as we have things that are more quantitative. At Slack, we tried to make it, you're saving a lot of time. And that is often like why you build a collaboration tool and even think of it in the first place, is that you've often been in a role where you're just wasting a ton of time trying to do something across like a bunch of different surfaces. And that's pretty hard to do. But I think you need to speak always to pain, because people are going to make decisions based on the way they feel. And managers get tired of people complaining about like a bad system or taking a lot of time to find something. And you can also do, it's, I don't mean this in like a really negative way, but it's almost like the fear of the dark. It's like, especially for us in growth, the thing that you kick yourself about later is the missed opportunity that you didn't see because you didn't have context at the right time, and it's very timing dependent. And so that's part of the pain that we lean into for our story, though of course it's going to be different for everyone based on what your solution and problem are.
Yeah, obviously. I think we have the same thing with billing and everything. It's more like people are
Yeah.
tired. People are like always saying, the finance team, like, I don't want to work more on billing. So that's what we use as a trigger
Yeah.
as well. It's like they're gonna complain
And it's
less.
dangerous to get it wrong too. I think that's that's part of the thing where it's good if you're a product person, it's good to continue throughout your career to try to get closer to revenue products and revenue generating products, because those are really do or die things where heroism is rewarded with a wartime promotion, and it's a very high visibility part of the product to your board and to stakeholders.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
I also think Slack and Notion, as you said, productivity tools don't lend themselves as much to an ROI, like a hard number ROI conversation. And exactly what Merci said. So first of all, both Notion and Slack benefited from a lot of virality. And when I was at Notion, we didn't really do any outbound. And I don't know how we would have done outbound to like reach out and say, do you want to save, fill in the blank, do less meetings, save more time. It's kind of really hard to quantify that. Instead, when you get virality, you have champions. So the goal is not to pitch from scratch, but rather to empower the champions to know what to say when they are pitching it internally. So it's all about what problems do we solve. And when we're comparing to other tools like Confluence, and in my case, it's not about comparing feature to feature, because we would have lost. Just like at Typeform, if we compared to SurveyMonkey, feature to feature, we'd have lost. It's more about like, well, what are you trying to accomplish as a business? So more like, what's your job to be done? And I took this quote from a customer and then I used it over and over, which was, Confluence is where your documents go to die. So
that's
awesome.
that's not true.
You can pay for Confluence, but nobody's using it. So it's money that you're just throwing away because nobody's using it. Wouldn't you rather pay a little bit more and have a tool that people actually use? And so anyway,
I'm writing that down.
Yeah, you should. I'm gonna use the same thing. I'm trying to. I have some comments.
It was a customer quote. I didn't say it. Just if anybody's from Atlassian, respect to Atlassian. Just quoting.
We won't say. I mean, you're just on a public webinar. That's fine.
Yeah, and the other thing I used, which was also publicly available, I think in the FYI, well, a certain blog, was the NPS score of all tools, because there's some publicly available NPS scores, and Confluence had like a negative NPS score, whereas Notion was a very high NPS score, and those were public, like third party created. So anyway.
Yeah,
that
makes a lot of sense. I get comments on the private thing that I should put the speakers on a bigger preview on the screen. But the thing is, we're using a new tool, and I'm not exactly sure how I do that. It's always me. So I'm gonna try while you speak. Don't get defocused with you on the spotlight.
But I'm getting busy.
I'm gonna take more questions, but before that, I would like to switch to the next thing, which is something that I would like to talk about, which is the freemium model. Both Slack, Notion, Typeform have a freemium model where like you have a free plan and your users can do a lot of things. And then you have paid plan, and the updates are done in product. It's not sales team calling people. It's more like the product should help upgrade itself. I'm curious on how many times there has been iterations over the scope of the free plan. Like, is it something that's been set in stone from the beginning? Things have been extremely clear on both companies. Like, Merci, maybe on Slack first. Was it extremely clear from the beginning that it was message retention? Or have you seen different iterations? Have you tried some things? Have you done any experiment to see if things would convert more?
Yeah, so we started working on paid conversion at the kind of end of my time there, which goes to show we spent almost 2 years just totally focused on activation. Hey, good job. We spent almost 2 years totally focused on activation because our hypothesis was driving activation drives retention. We were able to show that in the data, that quarter over quarter activation lifted, retention also lifted, commensurate with the initial activation lift. And then our assumption, because paid conversion pricing, especially on a freemium model, is such a lagging indicator of product market fit and retention, but we thought like, okay, like this will keep following through. And then after we had a couple of years of data and started to sort of, switch our gaze from driving product market fit and activation to driving paid conversion, really growing the value of the enterprise value of the product, we came across some hilarious issues with freemium. So I think that now, correct me if this is wrong, but I believe that now Slack has experimented or actually implemented for everyone a reverse free trial, which is when you do have a freemium plan and you can fall back to that, but you start people on one of your paid tiers so that they have a trial experience. They trial that for the first, 2 weeks, 30 days, and then they can fall back to freemium. In my time at Slack, we just had a freemium plan. And so people started off on a free tool, added as many people, and then they'd hit the integration limit or hit the message limit. And that was highly correlated with paid conversion. But we'd gone so hard on the Slack is free for everyone, forever, for all sizes of teams. That one of the first things that we discovered when we started to look at pricing and paid conversion, really like measure and try to drive it, is that a lot of people didn't know that they could pay for Slack. And so we're like, oh, dang, that was a big miss. So that was like one of the first things that
that's a good problem to have, right?
Depending, if you have enough volume and a broad potential customer base, then it's okay. But certainly would have preferred more people to be paying.
For sure. David, anything on your side? Like, what was it like?
Yeah, I think one thing that I love what Merci said. I think one of the things that's really interesting at both Typeform and Notion is that free users, even though they don't give us any revenue, have a lot of value because they drive virality, which drives our top of funnel, which brings in other paying customers. So one of the things that we were continuously trying to figure out is what's the actual value of a free user? How much are we willing to pay to acquire free users? And how do we want to treat free users? So that was one point that was important to us. Another thing about our free plan, early on at Notion, I joked that our biggest competitor to our paid plan at Notion was not Confluence; it was actually our free plan at Notion. And I think it's I don't want to say a mistake because obviously it's been very successful for a lot of companies where this has happened, but founders see every bug and every problem in their product, and as a result tend to undervalue it. Often the first price point is something that people are like, I would pay 10 times more than this. And so they pack a ton of value in the free plan because they don't think that the product's as worthy, or they just want to get a lot of usage and virality. And then you have so much value in the free plan that it's hard to convince people to upgrade to the paid plan. And at Notion, we had the exact same thing that Merci was describing. We said, free unlimited responses forever, which was very generous, and that attracted a lot of people who collected thousands of responses from simple forms and never had to upgrade. And in the future, when we tried to change that, it caused some friction. So,
yeah, that's interesting. What you're saying about the I can't minimize you. Okay, I won't make it work.
This is a cool setup.
It's interesting what you're saying about the fact that founders always see the product by its flaws, because it's something that I feel very much. Like every time I look at my product, I only see the bad things, even if it's very small. Like on the top right corner, I know there is something wrong. No one else sees it. But it's funny that sometimes we're going to devalue our own product. And even for the early employees, I think it's not just founders. It's the people who've been there early, who've known the product, have seen the early flaws, or confronted with the customers that may complain from time to time. It's hard, I think, for us in general to market our product at the fair price because we're always undervaluing it. I think as a sales team, it's probably your role to push so that the product is overvalued rather than undervalued, especially at the beginning.
Yeah. Sales and customer success. I think at Typeform, we had so many support tickets. We had millions of users, so many support tickets. When we started doing NPS, when we discovered that people love our product. And before that, the only voice you hear, people are less likely to write in to say, we love your product, you're amazing. Sometimes you get tweets, and
that's true.
But
that's true. You get Google reviews. You get Google reviews saying like, oh, this product is bad. And so you get one, like 500 customers, you get one review, like, oh, my product is so bad.
But when you run your NPS, that's, across your entire user base. It's not just the people who are frustrated enough to write in or love enough to write in. And you get a much more holistic view of the perception of your product. And you realize how much people hopefully love your product, or certainly that was the case at Typeform and Notion.
For sure. Did you, at any point, struggle in any of these companies? Did you struggle with the price point, like something that you couldn't cross, some sort of maximum? I don't know, because I guess Notion, like 500 a month, 1,000 a month, that's fine. A lot of companies are paying that. Slack is the same thing. Is there a number where you, at the beginning especially, maybe even now, they still struggle to close deals because people don't see the point of like paying, I don't know, 40K, 50K, 100K? Like, is it a maximum, a ceiling in the pricing?
Yes, and I have like the opposite anecdote. When we first launched Enterprise, we wanted to price it double our team plan to make our team plan more valuable, but it made it very hard to sell anything Enterprise, especially when the only feature at one point was unlimited version history. So you could see the history of a page more than 30 days. On the other plan, you couldn't. Then we added single sign-on, and slowly we added more and more features. But at the beginning, it was really hard to justify a price increase from our team plan to our enterprise plan. And the reason I said there's the double anecdote is, in the early days of Notion, I was really excited to close a 30K deal, then a 50K deal, then a 100K deal. But then when you're negotiating with like a big bank or a big pharmaceutical or something, and sometimes it's happened to me, you put in a proposal where you're like, there's no way they're going to accept this, but this will, we'll start negotiating from here. And then they just accept the pricing because for them, they're used to spending this much, if not a lot more, on their enterprise tools. So, so I think, both are true. Over to you, Merci.
Yeah, I think that's what's really cool about kind of the enterprise sales stuff is that you really can tune sort of that initial foot in the door to the industry and to the size of the organization. Whereas with the click through, credit card, you actually are going to find, and I think everyone is really like, realized this, that there's something magical still, even today, about $1,000 a month on a credit card, or, kind of less than 12K a year. You should be able to sort of like skip along on that for a while. And I think that the thing that was unique about Slack, but also honestly probably a factor of its time, and we're playing on hard mode now. We're no longer on basically, God mode, which I feel like venture-backed startups have been playing on God mode for the last 10 years or so. Now we're playing on hard mode. And so we're discovering things like pushback from the CFO and pricing point adjustments and things like that. But Slack really, after we debuted, charging almost $10 and then eventually over $10 for kind of a pretty basic set of paid features, everyone else raised their prices too. It used to be that things were more likely to be, $5, etc.
Yeah. I mean, you set a new standard for price. Like it's like Stripe has sort of said, because before like the PSP prices were like completely hidden, and then Stripe has said some sort of 1.5% thing. If they had said 0.5%, everyone would be at 0.5% probably, and everyone would be losing even more money. But like I think as Slack was a leader in the space, in the same way that Notion now is a leader in the space as well, because like Google Document at the time, Confluence was just pricing were just weird, it was hard to know, right? They didn't have a good pricing page. So I think you said price as the leader on the market. You sort of set the standard for price. I have a few questions, so I'm going to take them. One of the questions, I think it's for the both of you. Maybe David, you can start. What was the approximate split in revenue over time between the bigger and the smaller accounts, like between sort of SMBs, mid-market, and the enterprise thing? How much was it, and how did it evolve?
Yeah. So this time I was actually inspired by Slack. So I don't know if we want Merci to go first, so I don't steal her thunder.
Go ahead.
So I read, when I was at Typeform, I read SurveyMonkey's S1, and when I was at Notion, I read Slack's S1. which is a document they publish before they go public and shares a lot of like how their business works and everything. And what struck me about Slack was less than 1% of their customers represented over 50% of their revenue. And that to me was like, okay, this is how I can move the needle for Notion. It's figuring out how to, the enterprise motion. How do we go up market? How do we make that happen for Notion? And when I joined, we didn't have an enterprise plan. So it was part of the pricing and packaging, creating the pricing and packaging for the enterprise plan. I like to think of myself as a product manager, although any product manager would probably cringe if I said that. But it's not just about sales. It's about, how do we position ourselves in the market? I just lost my train of thought. Can you remind me what
we can do a quick mic to Merci, and then you can gather.
No, but what was the?
Split between smaller and larger.
Right. So at the beginning it was 0. Yeah. Thank you, Merci. After a year, it was 8%, and it's been growing ever since. And it's So I actually don't know what the split is now, but I was very pleased that after a year we got to 8% of the revenue.
Yeah. Similarly, at Slack, we eventually grew up to be the 1%, and over 50% of revenue coming from that very tiny group. And I think this is where collaboration and seat-based pricing will pretty much be the case for any sort of multiplayer product, where not only are banks, hospitals, et cetera, whoever's using it, going to be opt into that higher price point based on their own sort of compliance needs, but also those are larger companies, so they'll be paying more per person, but also they'll have more people. And so you can sort of project, right, if that's the how the product works, if that's the dynamic of your product, then you could plan on seeing similar. And of course, it would be a sort of counterpoint, maybe even warning to you about your pricing and packaging if that isn't the case. And then there are companies where you think that might be the case. I think it's I don't want to share particular numbers, but it's a little bit different for Figma, because Figma has this very strong single player use case where it's very easy to adopt. People are using it in school, people are using it as contractors and just sort of on their own. And so they still have this really vibrant kind of SMB self-serve product. And so they're a little bit, I think, of an outlier in terms of the revenue split for the stage of company that they're at.
Yeah, and they're still alone on the market, right? Sort of. Now that they've moved Sketch and Photoshop away, it's just them. So they do what they want.
Yeah.
But I think it's something that you need to be very deliberate about as a company. And at Typeform, we admired, or I should say our founders really admired MailChimp and Calendly, who famously became very valuable just focusing on SMB. And that's what company we wanted to do. And I think, the opposite example would be a Qualtrics or Medallia, where clearly it's a full enterprise motion with a similar product offering. And so I think early on you need to figure out what, where do you want to win and what's going to actually make you a really big company. And with the example of Slack, it was clear that to live up to its potential, Notion had to have a strong enterprise solution.
Yeah. Well, that makes a lot of sense. I have another question that's gonna maybe oppose you both, or maybe you're gonna agree. But Juliet is asking basically about the roles and of marketing growth versus sales in the pricing strategy. And Juliet's working in marketing, and she is asking if she should drive the pricing experiment and the pricing strategy, and then leverage sales feedback, or should it be driven by sales, who then are going to use marketing, or should it be together? And if yet, how do you manage that? Maybe David, you can start. How do you manage that?
Merci and I talked about this at a dinner recently. So it's a very hot topic, and my opinion is it should be both. And I think it should be more like a CEO who makes the final decision, because if you only let sales or you only let growth, they'll inherently optimize for their KPIs and what they're trying to achieve. And you need to have somebody who's thinking holistically about the whole picture. So, I mentioned at the beginning, I was part of the pricing committees, and the key word is committee. We had a cross-functional committee that was deciding on pricing together, because, if you are trying to improve conversion from free to paid, it may hurt your enterprise plan, and it may hurt your virality. Or there's a lot of, everything has a knock-on effect. Nothing is in total silo of anything else. So anything to add?
You're within an ecosystem. I think it's right to remember that. And then one of the things that we did at Slack that was a surprise to people who are kind of joining during that hyper growth period is that we really didn't want a ton of free teams that were not using Slack for a work use case. And so we sort of let Discord arise and really own that market, and those and we would refer customers over to them. So we had huge open source communities that were using Slack. They're an open source community. They had thousands of people. They were just never going to pay us. Those individuals, we hope that they were having a good experience and that they would have a good experience, using it in that open source community or sort of like off-label use case, and then bring it into their own startup or their own team or company. But we were very aware of not building too much into the free plan and asking ourselves, okay, is this feature uniquely useful for people who have a shared objective, work together, and are on a team? And if so, then we try to really put those things only in one of the paid plans. But it's always a discussion. And I think that the thing that David and I really agree on, it's that you have to have someone with a lot of context and a very strong opinion. And that's almost always the CEO.
Yeah, even for later stage companies, like if you're doing, like you mentioned, Slack wasn't that big. It was doing 6 million revenue, but it wasn't that big. But like for a company doing 10, 15, 20 million revenue with hundreds of employees, do you still think that should be on the sort of CEO founder thing? Do you think founders should keep working on pricing as long as they can? Or do you think that's then a VP of revenue thing or a CRO thing? Like how does it evolve the responsibility in the company?
Yeah, I think, ultimately you do want someone with board visibility and eye on sort of what the 5-year trajectory of the company is, because, the example that you brought up, Lucas, of what if Stripe had charged 0.5% instead of 1.5? Holy shit, what a huge difference that would have been for their enterprise value, right? Mm-hmm. That's a huge, it's massive. And so there's, small changes on price compound really quickly. And so you do, I think, want someone with that context. But as the model gets more complex and you're looking at trade-offs between, cannibalization of the freemium and its impact, you need a lot of data around it. You need a strong, someone who can really model this out so you can plot out a lot of scenarios. Even today, we're going to turn on pricing and packaging at Pinobi. We're going to start charging for people. We've been in a closed beta so far, and we have a little model that I built so that we can all sort of play around with okay, what if we charge this per seat? What if we charge for a viewer? What if we charge XYZ? What if we block based on this? So that we can all sort of compare that to traffic and run that conversion through and understand and give visibility into it. And so I think it's if something is complex, you need a lot of data and the ability to model different scenarios. So that's almost like a toy or a tool that you can give to the executive team if you're working in data growth marketing, to let them have a way to tune the levers themselves and understand how things will shake out in the future. But it is something that, has such an impact on the health and viability of the business that execs do need to be continually involved, but hopefully in a helpful way.
Yeah. There is something that has been going back in the last 2 minutes between you two. It's sort of the price point. So I'm gonna ask a question that we get every time we do an event on pricing and everything. But should the sales try to sell twice the price? Because marketing is often pushing, and marketing product, they're often saying we should charge more, and then you have a sales team going yeah, man, you should go on the demo with us, and then you try to charge more. What's your take, both of you? And maybe we'll have one last question and then again from there. It's been 45 minutes. Should you try, as a sales rep, should you try to charge a lot more than you think a product is worth, just to see what's the answer? David, maybe.
Yeah, I think, I don't think that's the right way to look at that challenge. I think it's more like what are customers willing to pay for the feature set that we're offering, and how do those customers like to buy? It's kind of thinking of like not just product market fit, but like product and business model fit. You can't sell $100,000 ARR like ACV deal self-serve, and it doesn't make sense to have a salesperson selling, $25 a month subscriptions, which I did for a while at Typeform. Nonetheless, normally it shouldn't make sense. So it's kind of like you want to put sales in at the right place where that fit is right, where people are willing to spend more, where they want to speak to sales because they have and they want to have customer success because they have like they want a custom contract, they want other things that are custom for them. And so I think that's the way to think about it. And if you have a product that's like that, so Typeform, for example, didn't really have a great enterprise product. As I mentioned earlier, it was deliberate. So it didn't make sense to have a big sales team. We had a sales team of 4 people, and it was really just kind of a support plus team that was handling all support related questions that were more salesy from larger accounts. But our biggest deal was like 10K. So it never made sense to scale the sales team. Whereas for Notion, it obviously makes a lot more sense from everything I described. I won't repeat myself. Yeah, I think I'll hand over to Merci.
Yeah, I think that the willingness to pay is really like what this comes down to. So if you haven't already, there's a great book called Monetizing Innovation that was written by a pricing firm who are experts.
Yeah, we have it at the
and
office. We have a copy at the office.
Oh, good. Yes, you should definitely read it, and it really helps you understand how to design the product around the price. And product managers, and especially founders, early on should be thinking about like how much is this worth to whom, and how much are they willing to pay. And then I think everyone who's been in any kind of a negotiation, even if it's just for a pair of sunglasses in a plaza in the Mediterranean, you want to remember that if someone immediately agrees to the price, it's too low. Like if you've asked for a raise and they're like, sure, you're like, I did not ask for enough, and so it's very tempting to say, oh, we want this to be so cheap that like everyone will buy it. But that's where it's good to have those guidelines of expansion and net revenue retention to help guide you, because it would be horrible if someone started to pay you and then they churned. Like paid churn is a lot worse than free churn. And so you want to make sure that like it's considered enough that only the people who have started to pay you are people who will keep paying you and who actually like have that problem. And so this is like, subjective, but there's a lot of both quantitative, but there's a lot of qualitative data that people should spend a lot more time getting than typically they do, especially at early stage companies.
Yeah, I'll add a little something about the willingness to pay. That's often something, and I think Merci will do a better job of explaining that, but that's something you can kind of tease out of people with the right interviews, or you can also really sense, as Merci said, from a sales conversation, I could have sold this for more. So 2 thoughts. One is, as a rule of thumb, I like to lose about 10 to 20% of my deals due to pricing. That means that my pricing is about right. I'm not leaving too much on the table, and I'm not losing too many deals. So that was one thing. The other thing that I used a lot with this, and this is very data driven, so a tool like Mercy's would be great for this, is understanding your personas, segmenting them out, like who's willing to pay more, and seeing what features those people use that maybe other people don't use. And at Typeform, there was a great example of this where people who we thought were more willing to pay tended to use a certain feature that was not used by basically almost the entire rest of the population. And therefore, we knew that by moving that feature up to a higher paid plan, we would get those users to pay more, and it wouldn't affect the other users.
Yeah.
That was very hard to do because we didn't have a tool like Hyperline. So
good one. Good one. Just in terms of time, I think we could have a second webinar just on this. But I have one last question, I want to take it, and then we'll close for today, and everyone can get back to their day or their evening in France. There is a question from Olga. which is basically the approach. I think we've touched on that a little bit, but maybe a more direct answer would be, how did we approach deciding what feature should be in the free plan versus in the subscription plan? For example, she says the feature that is the most valuable to users, should it be used to drive usage? I think that's the question we have as well. Should it be free to drive usage, or should we be paid because they're going to upgrade for that? For some tools, it's very easy. Like for video tools, you can just make export paying, and so people have to export.
Yeah.
But then on some other tools, it's harder. So how do you approach that? And that's going to be the last question.
Yeah, I think it very much comes down to the intended usage and the existing like pattern of the tools that people are using. So we often spend a lot of time in terms of product market fit, thinking about the product, and to our detriment, I think, as product managers and product marketing managers, we ignore the market part of it. So it's really important to understand what are other people charging for? What segment am I in? How do our customers think about us? How do our customers think about what brings value? And then don't be shy about charging for the things that bring value in the context that's specific to your product. So a lot of notes apps and things like Slack and Notion are great examples of this, where there is a very clear free use case to be had there. And so you want to make sure, like Slack, that you don't want to be Discord if you're not ready to be Discord. If you're not going to use that kind of a pricing model, if you're not going to do things like try to amass a massive audience so that you can sell ads against them, then you don't need to drive up, free usage because you're selling eyeballs. Actually, you're an enterprise tool, and so you're going to monetize on sort of like work necessary or work supplementing features. Yeah. So you do need to have a strong point of view about what is the value that we're bringing to whom, when, and what is the context through which they are buying our solution, and really think about it from the customer point of view, even though you are looking still at these models and seeing it from your own point of view. And the massive difference between charging $5 and $4 for something is huge.
Yeah, that makes sense. David, maybe one last
Yeah,
point.
I think the way I would be thinking about what to put in your free plan versus what to charge for, or yeah, can you hear me? Yeah, it was I would want to make sure that the free plan is generous enough that people experience value and get the aha moment, because that's what you want to give away. That's what I think you should be willing to give away for free, but not like the continuous ongoing value that they'll get forever. Otherwise, they'll never have to convert to paid. So that's like a very high level framework to think about it. But the way that looks for like Typeform, for example, is you can build a Typeform with all the features you want. When you add a feature that's paid, there's a little pop-up that says, hey, just so you know, this is a paid feature. If you want to collect results with this, you're going to have to pay at some point. And then give them a certain amount of results that they can collect for free so that they can, see that this is working before they have to pay. And at Notion, I give the example of the 1,000 blocks, where you already started creating content, you started collaborating, you've got that aha moment of this is a better experience than anything I've used in the past. And then you ask them to pay, and then they already know that they're willing to pay for it. So that's like a high level framework instead of a tactical thing, but I hope it's helpful.
That's a good topic. I mean, we are trying a free plan as well, so we'll see how that goes at Hyperline, because I've always been thinking, like, the problem with billing tools is like you have to talk to sales for 2 weeks. Like, I need to send an invoice today. I don't want to talk to a sales in 1 week and then maybe send an invoice in 5, right? And Stripe was the only one that was, but with a limited subset of features, that was available as a self-serve thing. So we're launching a freemium as well. We had so many questions internally about what do we include in the freemium? What do we exclude of the freemium? So I think we can do another webinar in a year, and we would have tried like maybe, I don't know, five different things and feature sets, and we'll see where this goes.
I also, I don't know who our audience is, what type of companies they work for, but there's companies I've worked for where I would never do a free plan, right? Like, if your product requires a big implementation, or like a lot of integration, or there's like an upfront thing, like then a free plan doesn't make as much sense. You may have a watered down trial or something, but even then it's tough. I've sold like pure enterprise tools, And in that case, a free plan doesn't make sense. So it's not for everybody, but in PLG, what we were describing.
Yeah, because it's the time to value, right? If you don't have value quick on the free plan, then you just don't see what you can get. If the implementation is long, like it doesn't matter if you pay
it's
or not.
a question of who the end user is too. So a lot of the folks that I know have worked with me at Slack, for instance, and it will be a little bit of a surprise to see interviews with folks who want to have a demo and they want to go through a procurement process, because that's how their function at the company buys software. Engineers, product managers, if you're selling into that cohort, you need at least a trial, which is why BI tools have that. But you probably need some sort of like a seat-based or usage-based, freemium type of
so they can try,
option, because that's how they're used to buying. But there are people who want, need, and expect a demo, and it usually is. That's a wonderful thing about building for enterprise, is that so much that we don't think about every day is determined by, I'm an engineer, and these are the tools I use, and this is what I'm used to. I'm a PM, I'm in finance, here are my set of expectations. So it's helpful to, when you're sort of thinking about pricing, write down for each of your end users and your buyers, if they're different people, and sometimes they are, what are their expectations and assumptions? How are they buying software today? What software are they responsible for buying? And then you can kind of sum it up and understand, oh, okay, so engineering has a budget like XYZ, and this is how they adopt this slate of tools, and then they adopt, things like this at this level, et cetera. And that's why you see things like open source being such a driver for engineering teams, because that's how they adopt tools, not because people want to give away that much for free. They would love not to.
As an engineer, give me a freemium. All right, so we'll stop there. We'd love to continue the conversation, but maybe we'll do it next year or something. We'll do another series. Thank you to everyone who attended. On the Hyperline side, we are launching something new on Wednesday as well. So it's going to be on Wednesday morning. So Wednesday, really early in the morning on the US West Coast. But stay tuned for that. And yeah, thank you, Merci. Thank you, David, for being with us today. It was a great conversation. And yeah, bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.